Hello everyone, welcome to our new series Talkative Strangers, in which we'll bring people from all around the globe and get to learn from them. Today we have with us Shashi. Thank you so much for coming. Can you give the audience a bit of your introduction?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone, my name is Shashi. I've been living in US for 10 years now. I came here to do my master's. Since then, I've been working here as a software engineer.
Okay, that's cool. So, can you tell us about how democracy started in USA?
Yes, a brief
So,
intro about that.
yeah, sorry. So, what I wanted to talk today was there's one thing I feel India does better than US, which is running election. Probably
Okay.
among the modern countries, US is the oldest democracy. They gained independence from Britain in 1776. Since then, they've had democracy. There was a civil war in between, but still the democracy continued. Uh, Mainly the presidential term that runs every 4 years. They have a upper house which is equal to Rajya Sabha. Even that too is a 6 year term. And then they have a lower house equal, and they call it House of Representatives or Congress. There the term is 2 years. So that's kind of briefly about the different houses. This is at the federal level. There are also elections at the state level as well. Today, I won't be going into too much details about specifics about these types of election, but just talking about the election process itself.
Okay. Yes.
So within democracy index, US ranks 25 and India ranks 51. This is based on the Economist, which is a business magazine based in UK. Both of them are first part of post system, that is whoever gets the most number of votes wins elections. That is typically the
Yes.
case. There are some exceptions to it. The other systems typically are ranked choice voting, where voters rank the preferred
Right.
candidates. So they pick first choice, second choice, third choice, and so on. And then there are methods to do it. And in a multi-party system, that is typically a better way to run an election than the first part, the post system. And include references to some of the other videos. There's some good videos from a creator called CGP Grey. He explains it very well, and I recommend everyone to watch it.
Right.
One difference, though, is there's primaries in US, so which is like there's so circling back a bit, moving back a bit for sorry, going back a bit. So most people assume there are only two parties in US: the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Democratic Party is Obama and Biden's party. Republican Party is Trump and Bush and Ronald Reagan, his party. Ronald Reagan was the president in 1980s. Uh, so the way they pick example for president, right? So there'll be multiple candidates from the Democratic or Republican Party who want to uh, get the ticket from their party to run a presidential election, say. So in India, the way it's done is typically somebody like a party head decides who gets ticket for what election and what constituency. In US, it's
Right.
usually what they call primary. So even that is an election. So multiple candidates, anybody who is registered to that party, so just a member of the party, can register to be a candidate for a specific election in a specific constituency, and then voters get to pick. So there'll be members of the party who will go to the polling booth and do and vote for their candidate. So whoever gets the highest votes. So there's for US there's a complex system. The election goes through all 50 states, and there are different methods each state picks. So eventually, based on the members of the party itself, pick who they want to vote their candidate to be for the general election, and then there is a phase two of election, which is general election, which is where actually everybody who is a registered voter can go and cast their votes, and then whoever gets the most votes wins the election. Um, but one difference is everything is political or partisan, they call it, which is like the party controls or the ruling party runs the election. What I mean is, in India, there is a federal election commission that decides when the election happens, how the election is conducted in different phases, and what the process is, like where the polling booths are. Uh, there's regulations about who can approach the polling booths, when you can run the elections, all of those things. So US is kind of a different system where there is states have a lot more freedom. So including being able to run elections is all controlled by states. So that's why instead of having one national election for even for a presidential election, they have 50 different elections where each state can make its own rules about when you can vote, where you can vote, who can vote, what are the
Okay.
requirements to be able to vote, and then people vote. But the thing is, so the person who runs election for each state is called Secretary of State. So even that position is elected. So
Hmm.
whichever party is the ruling party, their person is the Secretary of State, or whoever wins the election
Waiting for me.
for the party is the Secretary of State, and then they are the ones who are overseeing the whole process.
Hmm.
Imagine if that happened in India, like if the head of the Federal Election Commission was a BJP person and he gets to run election throughout the country. Uh, Luckily, there the amount of corruption is very low. Like even in, like example, presidential election, which is a national election that happens every 4 years, the number of out of usually about 100 million people vote in the election. U.S. population, for reference, is about 330 million. Out of that, they had like single digit fraud. So less than 10 people committed, like they do a lot of research about it. It's a valid number, and less than 10 people commit fraud. So that's why the amount of fraud is very low. It works out, but there are other ways in which the system is kind of broken. And
Okay.
we'll talk about that.
Yes. So if
Um,
we basically, yes, yes, please continue.
Yeah, so one of the ways in which I was telling the like states administer their own election, right? One of the ways in which they make it harder for people to vote is, uh, yeah, seems like in the last election about 30 people were referred as committed to have committed fraud, but they're still looking at it. This is in Michigan State, one of the states. Uh, But probably after this, I'll probably include some references about how many people, how many actual confirmed fraud cases happen in US. But there's good data about when these frauds happen, or like how many cases of fraud that were detected and people were prosecuted. People can report crimes, but it's not always possible. It's not always true that
In
people.
US,
Yeah. Compared to India, where I've heard even cases like poll booth capturing, where some party takes over the
right,
entire
right,
poll booth, and then all the votes, or pretty much most of the votes, would go to that party. So those kind of things don't happen. So that way, it's good. But mostly in terms of regulations, India, I feel like does a lot of things better than US. Looking at example logistics, it is required by law in India. I think a person cannot travel less than more than 2 kilometers to be able to vote. So there is a polling booth in the middle of Gir forest for one person who votes in India. And people even voting to set up the polling booths, they have to travel by boat, walking, and even in the middle of forest, like I mentioned, and people still are able to go there and vote. And then another thing India does use is they use electronic voting machines for most of the things.
right.
According to election experts, it's not a reliable. Electronic voting machine is not reliable because, unlike paper ballots, where you can verify, it's easy to verify, right? Somebody just
Hmm.
fills the ballot and then you can manually count them. You cannot like versus a computer where you can just hack the computer and then move all the votes that are cast to one party from another party. There is auditing and all that,
Right.
but it's not verifiable for a common person. That's one of the important things people feel is a requirement for voting, to be able to manually verify, tabulate, and verify that the vote was cast to the person they say it was. Like in on paper ballot, once you mark it on paper, any common person can tell, okay, where the if the vote was cast to that person, if it actually was registered to that person. But on an electronic machine, voting machine, you can set it up in a way that you cast vote for one party, but it goes to a different candidate. That may be intentional or accidental, but it's not possible to verify for any person or even for an expert to say for sure, because as soon as you enter, it just increments a counter and you can't go and confirm that it actually went to the candidate you wanted it to. In US, there are
Okay.
some places where they use electronic voting machine, but it's kind of more sophisticated where you, on a touchscreen paper, you select the candidate you want to vote to. It just has a paper and then it purchase hold for the candidate you want, and then they feed into a machine, and then the machine uses optical character recognition or other ways to uh, uh, read the vote, so, or verify the vote. So that's one way. So there is still a paper trail, and you can verify the election if you want to. But there's still they use electronic or voting machines for some steps in the process. Um, but yeah, but electronic voting machine generally is more convenient for people and even for everybody to count the votes as well. But if there is fraud, it's always hard to say. Other problem is if there's a bug in the code, it's not possible for anybody to. It's not like anybody who's written software knows. We cannot guarantee there are zero bugs in any complex system. You can test as much as possible, but nobody can say for sure. There is a good video by a person called Tom Scott. He's also a good YouTuber. I can include reference to that as well. He talks specifically about
Yes, yes,
what
after the recording.
yeah. No, just saying, we'll include it for the recording as well, so audience will know that there's this video, and he speaks very well about why you cannot use electronic voting machine reliably. It's not like 100% guaranteed system that works. Other way India does better is they try to. There are no disenfranchised voters or like a group of people who don't believe in election or try to stay out of the election. I would probably say educated voters are some in some way believe that in India because they feel like no matter what you do to try to change the system, it doesn't work. But still, most people participate. There's also like symbols for people who cannot read text, so they can identify the party they want to just by looking at the symbols. I think even US in the voter roll or in the ballot there is symbols, but that's one thing India does well, I think. Um, Another difference I think I found is here, like requiring a form of ID to be able to go cast a vote is not considered a hindrance. Like, for example, you need a voter ID in India and you need to carry that document or an Aadhaar card or some kind of ID to be able to go vote in India. And we don't see here it as a problem. I feel like it's a good thing because there is so much fraud. In US, it's considered a hindrance because being able to get an ID, like example, a driver's license is typically acceptable, but a person who doesn't have a car or who works a job like when during normal business hour, they don't feel it's worth their time to take 2 hours out of their job, go apply for a voter ID, like or get an ID or just driver's license or any form of ID. And this is actually does happen, especially for poor people or marginalized people, like black people and Latino people who are about 20% combined of US population. They find it as a hindrance, or it could be that there is no DMV or RTO. They're usually called DME, Department of Motor Vehicle. They might not be a DMV nearby, or they might not be public transport to go to that place. So all of those, it will affect a small percentage of people, but still they consider it a hindrance, and they do care about even those people being able to vote. So there's big debate among these two parties whether right to vote is it a right or is it a privilege, being able to vote. When US was first founded in 1776, even into the constitution, it was written in law that only uh, white people with land were the ones who were supposed to be able to vote. That is, only the rich and powerful would be able to vote. Then a few years later, or sorry, not few, like few hundred years later, I think after 1900s, 1930, I think is when women were able to vote. Let me just check and confirm. Okay, black people were allowed to vote in 1870 as part of 15th Amendment, and women were allowed to vote in when early 20th century as part of 19th Amendment. So till then, black people or like non-white and only white male were allowed to vote. Uh,
Okay.
it's a just talking about why it's a bad thing alone can be an entire episode by itself. So I won't talk about it. But um, like everybody being able to vote now, people understand everybody should be able to vote. Voting is a right and not a privilege that only some people should have.
Right.
Uh, Another way as telling about uh, like how the election commission runs election. So there is a whole federal system. Those people are like experts in running election. They know about the logistics of the election, and 800 million people vote in India, which is the largest in any country in the world. No other country even comes close to so many people being able to vote. The next biggest might be, yeah, so China, India, and then United States. So yeah, US is the second largest democracy, and they usually have typically in US the voter turnout is around 60, 65%, less than 60, yeah, around 60% seems like. Last election was the first time they hit 66%. In India, 60% of voter turnout is very common. Usually it's around 70%. I think in Delhi election when Arvind Kejriwal won, it was around 80% turnout. So high turnout rates is usually very typical in India. Even though when people who don't believe in democracy still participate in it, it is very good. Um, yes, some of the things that by having a federal election commission, some of the things that they can do well is establish rules around the election. Like example, how long the campaign would last, how much money you can spend in elections, and what are the qualifications for the candidates, and if they have to provide any documents, all of those things they regulate it. Even in US, most of the regulations is about being able to get enough. Uh, I think here too there is a process where before they can contest an election, they have to get support or require certain number of signatures, right, to file the nomination. Is that true?
I think there is ticket also needed by the ruler
That's
who wants to contest
party, right?
election.
Yeah, so that's for each party. So the
Yes.
party establishment decides. So, but I already spoke about that. So that's the primary process.
Right.
So in
Hmm.
US, I think each party can set it so, but both the major parties have around similar rules, and the primaries usually happen on the same day. And then registered voters or registered party members will go cast the vote, and then whoever wins the highest votes. So there is even a campaign. So it's not like you just before the primaries you just register and then nothing happens. So even for the primaries there is a campaign, and people will go and campaign with the party members, and then after that there is an election on a specific date, and then usually a few months later is when there is the general election. Some states there is difference. So some states, instead of each party having its own primary and one candidate from each party participating in it, there are states like Georgia, where even California as well. So any number of candidates from any party can participate in this primary. Some in some states it is a top two. So top two candidates, irrespective of what percentage of vote they get, like whoever gets the most number of votes, it can be from the same party or different party. The two candidates, if either of them didn't get more than 50% of the vote, then the top two candidates are picked, and then there is a general election with just those two candidates. That's another way. So I was telling about first part the post system, and then ranked choice voting. This is another system where it's a different method of electing, finding a winner for an election, but it is more about getting consensus. So eventually, when uh, for a candidate to win, you want to get support of maximum number of constituents. So what happens is, example, if you have four candidates, right? If a person, a candidate gets 26% of the votes by this analogy, so one person can get 26%, other candidate gets 24%, and two candidates will get 25%. Even though a candidate got just 26% of the vote, which is minority of the population, he might win the election. But with this ranked choice voting and first part of the vote, it's like even though it may not be everybody's first choice, but it may be the candidate who may win may be the second choice of most, like more than 50% of the people. So he might win. So that's like you're trying to establish consensus from a large group of people or majority of the uh, uh, constituents, and then that person gets the victory, and then he gets to rule. Um, so yeah, there are different systems like that. Still talking about CGP Grey video, so that's really definitely a good video to watch. He goes into details about each of these different types of uh, election systems, and then he kind of explains which one is better and why and where they would work. That's one of the things like election experts, what they see is if you always pick first part the post system, usually in most places, there'll only be two major parties. There is less margin opportunity for smaller parties to survive. But in a diverse country where you have like some percentage, there might be like 30%, 30%, 30%, three such big groups, and there's 10% of people who belong to one more group. Your final election candidate should also kind of represent. There should be 30% of people from one candidate. Like your final Congress should also kind of look similar. Your Congress is the word they use for the parliament here, or like I'll say your final parliament should also kind of look like if there's 30% people from one caste or religion or from who belong to one ideology and there's 20% of people who belong to a different ideology, your final cabinet or your final parliament also should kind of look like that. With first party system, that doesn't typically happen. So I was talking about disenfranchised voters. Another thing that India does, I was talking about like how there's a Federal Election Commission that sets up all these rules. So in India, there is a requirement about how much money they can spend in an election when the campaign
Yes,
starts,
yes. There is,
when,
there is.
and then who can come and campaign for the election. A lot of those rules are similar to rules established by EU. I think Germany has such similar kind of rules for running an election. I think even in UK, there is very strict timeline about when you can start campaigning and when you can finish campaigning. That way, you can. There's not a lot of undue influence on from external people on the candidate, right? So that's what we're trying to see. It should be like the opinion of the people as what should matter the most instead of having people with some people who are very rich and powerful, they have more say in it. One such example is like having like limiting the amount of campaign spending. In US, there is no such law. There is limit about how much one person can contribute to the campaign. The way they usually do that is they just get donations or funding from different people and then they collect, pull them together and then use as expense for campaign. Could be for any events or could be for ad spending on television or newspaper or anything like that. So there is requirements about how much one person can donate, but there is no limit on how much they can spend overall. In India, there is a
Okay.
limit about for each kind of election.
Limit,
So
yes.
local election, it's not really followed. A lot of people cheat and spend
Yes,
more.
it is not.
Uh,
Right,
but
right.
still, at least having those rules kind of makes sense because in US too, what happens is most of the times for elections, like the person almost always the candidate who spends the more money is the one who wins the election. So the more you can raise funds, that's how you win. So that means like rich and powerful, they'll always find creative ways to contribute to the campaign, and they are the ones who have undue influence. It has gotten so bad that companies that are interested in this, they've written state laws. They've typed it up. They've just passed those law word to word without bothering to change a word. It's happened. I can link examples of that as well. John Oliver did a segment about it. I think he's also a funny guy. He has a 30-minute long show in HBO. He talks about various topics. That's one of the things they do there as well. But having these kind of requirements is kind of similar to how Europe does it, and it's a good thing. It's proven to be effective.
Okay.
But out of all of these, one thing that actually matters a lot is which party wins election. More than
Right.
90% of elections in US, before even the election, you know which party will win. If that's the case, how is it even a democracy if you know which party is going to win? The reason for that is some states believe in certain ideologies and parties are kind of aligned with their ideology. Example is like I can think about is guns. So US has a lot of guns. That's why you see a lot of shootings because there are three guns for every person, something like that. There is more guns than the number of people in US. Let me actually confirm that, but they have a lot of
Okay.
guns, highest number of guns in the world. Yeah, there are 393 million guns, and the population of US is 300 million, 330 million. So there are more guns than there are
Damn.
people.
That's
Per
insane.
capita, I think Switzerland, yeah, per capita, I think Switzerland has more guns, but those are strictly regulated because they need to be every adult or something like that. Like anybody can be drafted to, that is, anybody can be requested, any citizen can be requested to join an army. So everybody trains, and then Switzerland has guns, but you don't get to keep your gun with you. The government keeps the gun, but there are more guns per capita than that has the highest number of guns per capita. But in US, everybody has guns. Uh, and you all often see mass shooting because guns are so easy to get. Literally, like Walmart, which is equivalent to Big Bazaar. You can go to Big Bazaar, you can apply for, you can just sign a form and buy an AR-15, which is like more powerful than AK-47. People buy it.
Okay.
They have rifles and they have multiple. There's no limit on how much ammunition you can buy. Again, these are laws that vary across different states. Some states it's stricter. You have to apply for a license or a gun permit. There'll be a background check after that you get. Some states, like literally, you go buy a packet of sugar and then you can buy a gun and then go home. That's how easy it is to buy a gun in US. So one party supports this gun ownership a lot, other party doesn't. Other party, it's not that they don't support gun ownership. They see because of all this mass shooting, they feel like there should be more regulation. The reason for this law is when US was founded in 1776, they had this thing called Second Amendment, which is like once they wrote the Constitution, they changed the amendment, they made lots of modifications. The First Amendment is basically freedom of speech. Second Amendment is about this gun rights. So the reason they said that is any person in US, any citizen should be able to own guns in case the government turns into a tyranny or a dictatorship. If there are guns with citizens, they'll be able to fight back. That's the idea behind it. But now it's all kind of mangled. If the government has nuclear weapons and these people think they can fight back with their automatic
Right.
guns and pistols. Uh, yeah, but because of these things like this, like for example, one party that supports gun ownership vehemently versus other party who wants to try and regulate because of all these mass shootings. There are people who, example, gun owners who like gun, who like to use gun for fun. They are always tightly aligned with this one party, so they always vote for the party no matter what that candidate does about anything else. So that way, like kind of the country is divided. There are some states where either party could win. Those are called swing states. So during a presidential election, for example, the presidential candidates don't even go to these other states. Example, like a Democratic candidate, California is very democratic. They call it blue states. So the candidate, like for a Democratic Party, may not even go to that state to campaign for a presidential election. They are always focused on these
Mm.
states, which are 8 to 10 states. They're trying to spend most of their time there and then trying to change the voters' mind by campaigning there so that they can win the election. That's the case. So yeah, that's how bad it is. And then other thing I was telling is everything is political. I was telling about like how there is Secretary of State, the person who runs election, who he also runs an election like this. There is primary, there is a general election, and then he belongs to a party. They run on the party's ticket, and then they win an election. So even the person running an election in each state belongs to a political party. Imagine if, like I was saying, with the Federal Election Commission, like if BJP owned all the election commission or runs all the election in all of these states. Yeah, each state because they have their own election, so there's different. So the Secretary of State can be from different party in each of these states, but still it's a political one. Not just that, even the judge also contest an election and they win an election. Even they belong to a party. Like I was saying, how each party has a different set of ideology, so based on that, based on what party the candidate belongs to or the judge belongs to, you can kind of know how we will rule even before a court,
Mm.
even before a case goes to court. This is the true. In this case, this is true even for Supreme Court. So Supreme Court, they have a panel of 9 judges. So even those people, you kind of know even before the court goes to Supreme Court which way they will rule. Sometimes they usually set precedent. They might narrowly rule it for only this specific case, or sometimes they'll rule in a way, okay, based on this, all cases that belong to this category need to follow a certain law. I was talking about how, example, even before a court case goes to court, you can kind of know based on the political party of the judge, how the judge might rule. Like I was giving an example of abortion. Like some party, the Republican Party believes that every life is important, and so committing doing an abortion is like committing a crime because you're killing the unborn baby. That's what they think.
Right.
But being able to get abortion is so beneficial. It reduces so much unwanted pregnancy. It's even linked to crime. There is an interesting Freakonomics episode. It's also a very interesting podcast called Freakonomics. It talks about economics. So there is research and there is actual data showing that how like abortion and crime are related. So when the abortion was legalized, a lot of unwanted pregnancies came down, and then after that, 20 years later, the crime also came down. They could actually tie. There's a serious discussion about this. So there's good data showing that abortion bring down crime. Also, other thing is it reduces unwanted teenage pregnancies, which is a problem in India. So having access to abortion is very, very beneficial to the country and the economy. But there's one party that believes that abortion is a crime. They say every life is important, yet they are the country that supports guns, which are killing people. There are more people who die from gun violence than any other type of crime, more than even road accidents. So it's very hypocritical, but that's what one party believes, and that's
Yes,
how
yes.
the system is. So depending on which, so right now the Republican Party, so there are six judges from the Republican Party. So there was a case in 1970s where this already went to the court and they had legalized abortion up to a certain number of cases. But now some states, like I saying, because every state has freedom to enact their own law, some states have criminalized abortion, even in case of rape or incest, or if your father rapes you, still you cannot get an abortion. So that's how strict in some states the laws are, like Alabama as an example. So now because of this previous Supreme Court ruling, it's again making its way slowly through appeals process to the Supreme Court. Once it reaches the Supreme Court, because there is six judges from one party that doesn't support abortion, everybody kind of knows, okay, once it goes there again, abortion will be legal and will cause lots of problems. That's one thing, how like even the political process, even the judiciary is kind of become very political. um, but most of the times they are sane, so usually they don't do something crazy, like just because a person belongs to a party, even though he committed murder, they would let him go. It's not that rampant, but like usually in terms of ideology, that's how they are aligned, and based on how what party they belong to, you can kind of guess how they will rule. That's one thing. And also one more thing I'm saying is the Secretary of State. And so as the country population changes, the country has to redraw the constituency boundary, right? In India, too, it happens as a population example, like
Right, right,
we
right.
split states into multiple states. So there too,
Telangana.
they do yeah, that was mostly political, but UP is splitting into Uttarakhand and other states, I think, because of population growth. Also, a number of so in US, the process is every 10 years they do a census, and based on the population results, they will split the MP, I think, or MLA. MLA seats into different number of different states. Each state gets a certain number of MLAs, and that's how like kind of the party gets the power. But you need to draw this boundary, which like you draw a boundary for the constituency, and then based on that you will kind of uh, figure out which what's the name, which ward, or what's the term in India, um, ward they call it, based on where you vote, right? So
The
there'll be different wards, or constituency, yeah, or MLA constituency assembly, something like that, right? There's a term for it where you decide which ward or which city you belong to, and then based on that you vote. So basically, they draw a boundary line of where which group you belong to, and then you go cast vote in that. Because the process is
District.
political, during what?
District. It's called district, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, which voting district you belong to, right? Because this is so
yes, yes, yes.
political, they know, like example, like black people and Latino people, they vote for Democratic Party. So what they try to do is they try to pack as many Democrats as possible into one voting district. So the way they do that is it's called gerrymandering. They draw the boundary line so that you put so to win an election, you need only 51% of the votes. There's this thing called gerrymandering where they draw the constituency line. So there's even extreme cases, like example, Delhi and Gurgaon. they both belong to one voting districts, even though physically they are far apart, and there's just one road that connects these two. So in Texas, there's a state like that. So what's happening is pretty much all people who vote for one party are block grouped together, so that way they can only win fewer number of seats. And the other party, even though they have minority, so you can kind of, even though you're only, let's say, 40% of the, you will get only 40% of the votes, you can still get 60 to 80% of the seats. You can smartly draw the voting boundaries in a way because it's just political. So that's one thing that's kind of messed up. So because of that, what's happening is uh, candidates in one party don't even try to appease candidates or voters from the other party. You know you're going to win your state no matter what. You just have to win over your voters. So that's kind of forcing people to line up there. So there is very little overlap about what these two different parties agree upon. Like having an independent commission kind of forces you so that like people who live close together belong to the same party. So it can be possible that you belong to one voting district, your neighbor belongs to one different voting district, and their neighbor belongs to your voting district. But that's how it's gotten. So because this everything is political, there is very little incentive for one party to try and appease the other party, and there is very little overlap. It's gotten so bad that like family example, usually parents vote for one party and all the rest of the kids vote for a different party, and they cannot get together and talk. They're arguing over who is right. But one party is definitely very, very evil. Not very, very evil, but definitely evil. Other thing is there is regulations about what you can say in the ad in India. There, it is usually not the case. Like you can even say as much lies as you want, as long as the candidate says he approves it or something. But there's not a lot of regulation, so that's why there's a lot of lies that are spread even in election, and people tend to believe it. Kind of even that's what has become with even with vaccines as well. One party believes that vaccines are fake. There is not even a COVID disease. They don't wear mask, thinking it's a hoax. It's gotten so bad.